Bliss Grit is an entirely listener-supported show. Supporting us is also designed to support you through keeping the episodes rolling, but also through rewards for your donation, like a getting started guide, a private forum, and downloadable meditations. To become a supporting member, you can visit patreon.com/blissandgrit.
Hello, beautifuls. You're listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Vanessa Scotto, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Brooke Thomas. On the show, we're having conversations about the awakening spiritual path. What does that even mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything? The beauty and the crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life. Today, we're speaking about the implication of how we choose our words. Historically, we've both bristled at what we perceived as a turn your frown upside down kind of positive approach to language. These days, though, we've both been called towards exploring the intersection of language, evolution, and creation. So in this talk, we're sharing our thoughts on the benefits and cautions of bringing attention to the words you use, the dilemmas of bypass and judgment, and how we both come to acknowledge that we can heal our conditioning through love and through making different choices. If you're enjoying the show, we so appreciate your support. It means a lot to us if you leave a review on iTunes. That helps people find the show, and it helps us connect with what's working for you. You can also head over to blissandgrit.com and subscribe to read our blog, get our weekly digest, or find out more about becoming one of our cherished and important supporting members on our Patreon platform. Just a note, next week I will be in Canada completing a training in a program called DNRS, which you may have heard us mention before. So there will be no new episode next week. I am, however, really looking forward to bringing back some stories and wisdom to tell you about my experiences. Lastly, you all know that sometimes we can curse on the show, and even though I think we were actually very clean in this episode, if you're in mixed, non-swearing company, you may want to pop in some headphones just in case. Okay, everyone, here we go.
Hello, Vanessa.
Hello, Brooke.
It's nice to see you on the other side of Thanksgiving holiday times.
Did you have a nice holiday?
So good. Yeah, we have a good big old Friendsgiving, so it was super sweet. You?
Oh my gosh, I got sunshine and beach and palm trees and a real chance to practice being non-codependent. So how wonderful.
I think you're probably not alone in that, except for people like me who skip that entirely and just hang with a whole giant group of friends.
Genius.
Yeah, that's the ninja warrior level of avoiding codependency. So actually post-Thanksgiving is a good time to have this conversation because we're full swing in the holiday season now, which most of us conceive of, experience, or talk about as like a high-pressured stress time. And me personally, in my practice, I've been playing a lot with, or noticing at least, how I use language unconsciously to create my experience of reality. So when we spoke with David Thomas, he did an exquisite job of pointing to us as creators. And he was talking about way more than just this, just what I'm pointing at. But language has been a way in for me lately of noticing it. So what I'm talking about specifically are, I'll use language in ways where I notice that I'm complaining, projecting worries into the future, lots of judging myself, judging the world, basically ways that just don't feel good, aren't yummy perspectives on things. And in the past, I've really bristled at anything that indicates like turn that frown upside down kind of thinking. And there is a lot out there around language that winds up being very bright-siding, very bypass, and very censoring of the experience of the self. Like, you're feeling a bad feeling? Don't feel that bad feeling. Don't say bad things. Cancel, clear, say the good thing, that sort of thing. And, I bristled against this for many, many reasons, in part childhood conditioning. Like, I grew up in a household, don't think I'm alone here, where if I felt a negative emotion to my mother, that meant she was failing at parenting. So anytime, even if something really upsetting would happen, don't be sad, don't be angry, don't be blah, blah, blah. Please be the happy, content, successful object so that I can be considered a good mom. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way towards my mom. That's just a very common mother-child pattern culturally. So anyway, that's why I've avoided it. But the holiday season, I can hear it in myself. I quite like the holiday season. I don't have a lot that I bristle against, but I have a client-based business. And so I'll hear with clients, or I'll hear out in the community a lot of languaging that I'm like, wow, why are we all so like, we're such bummers in advance? Like, we're so hard on ourselves and hard on this season in advance. So I was at my gym last night, and my teacher, who I love everything about my gym. I love it there. It is a magical paradise, including the teacher, who's delight. Like, she's such a little ray of sunshine. And so at the beginning of the class, as she was welcoming us all in, even she, like, just because it's the culture habit, she was saying, what were her words? Something like, you guys, you made it through Thanksgiving and you got yourselves in here, and you got this moment to take care of yourself before you have to rally again and squeeze yourself through the rest of the holiday season, and you can do it, right? And like, this is very common. It's intended as encouragement. And I just want to say again, she is a delight. But because I've been playing with language in myself, and also because I came off of a really spectacular Thanksgiving with a loving group of friends, it's like definitely a paradise experience for me every time we do Thanksgiving. It's like, okay, another way this could be said is, you just had a holiday, and now here we are together, and soon we're going to have another holiday. And so none of those things are sensory. Like, none of those things are, what would be the bright side examples of that? Like, I hope you all better have enjoyed your Thanksgiving, and now you're going to work out and you're going to love it. And then you're going to get on up and you're going to get out there and you're going to crush it for Christmas and Hanukkah, right? Like, that has this like opposite end of the spectrum. But we can just say things not in blank slate neutral, but just where there's openness. Like, can we first of all notice the way language maybe closes our experience of how we're relating to the world? And can we play with it in a way that's not censoring ourselves, not bright-siding ourselves, not cheerleading, but does create an experience of openness, and the emotions I've been playing with the most, not emotions, qualities I've been playing with are like wonder, curiosity, interest. So if something happens that's frustrating, I'm not saying like, hey, I'm going to learn something great from this. It's more just like, that happened and I feel this way. That's so interesting. I wonder what's going on. I'm so curious about this. So it has this kind of openness and this moving towards without shutting down and without shoving ourselves into a big grin. So that is a big mouthful, but that's something that I'm playing with in my own practice right now.
Well, if we think about the container of how are we shaping or influencing our experience of reality, language being one thing, that's where I think you and I have become increasingly curious. I mean, I don't know where it began. We always seem to be synchronized. In fact, y'all seem to be synchronized with us too. So I guess we're all on a journey
Maybe
together.
We're all dealing with this with language and viewpoint and perspective.
And essentially, like, where is our attention and energy going? like even our energy and the words we choose and form and our attention, like what part of a story are we focusing on? What part of language are we focusing on? So all of those things. And I was just like you. I mean, maybe in some ways, since we're all so empathic and intuitive, we're picking up on the dilemma in the culture and we're bringing the medicine through. So maybe at a certain point, because people were so into the bright side, like, no, you have to speak it like it's already your reality and everything's so positive. And there was such an ignoring of the pain and the shadow aspect that maybe a lot of us empaths and intuitives were bringing through, no, you can't just deny what's there, right? You have to meet it. But perhaps we're coming to a new place where it's like, okay, I mean, we've met it. We've done it. I've met my pain over and over again. I've met my shadow over and over again, right? I've gone down into the depths of despair. I've climbed up, flown around heaven. And maybe now we can have a different relationship towards this idea of shifting language and shifting attention towards, I even hate to say it, towards positive. That's what I was going to say. And I don't even like saying it. That's how wired in it is. So I think the whole thing's interesting, and it is still a work in progress for me. I mean, I don't know what this is. Even when, do you remember when that movie came out? I think it was called something like Messages in Water.
No, I don't know.
It was that Japanese. So there was a Japanese researcher.
Right. I didn't see it, but I know it. Yeah.
Oh, it was really beautiful. And they would show like freeze frame images of, I'm going to say this wrong, but they were taking pictures of water, but it's not just a regular picture. And they would show the crystalline nature of the molecules of water and how they would change based on what someone said to them. Or let's say they took a picture and they put the words love around it, or they took a picture and they put I hate you around it, that they would show that the molecules of water would take a different shape. And it really, like, it looked almost like a snowflake. It would take a different pattern. But whenever there were these negative words coming to the water, it would take a really, like, the color would be off. It would look very dysregulated, very chaotic pattern. And whenever there were these beautiful words shared with the water, it would take a beautiful, symmetrical, like, gorgeous snowflake-like pattern. And I mean, when you watch it, it's pretty freaking impressive.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. And yet, I still am going to talk poorly to myself, or you still find yourself caught in language loops. It's almost like when I saw that movie, it's like, wow, that's so impressive. And it was like, it was a fairy tale or something. Like, I still couldn't grasp that that's reality, that it's as real as, when I knock on my wood desk. Do you know what I mean by that?
I do. Yeah. And it makes me think about Suzanne Segal's book, which has been very meaningful to me, Collision with the Infinite. And she's no longer living, but she was a psychologist, a therapist who worked in private practice. And she had the stories about her awakening experience. So she was awake, and she talks about her conundrum almost of like being in private practice in a field that's been trained to glorify suffering. And you and I have talked about this before, but that, if we're talking about our suffering, then wow, something really meaningful is happening. A meaningful exchange of intimacy is happening. If we're talking about our suffering or sharing our darkness or complaining, and I have no problem with all those things. And I'm glad that my friends and I can share those things, but why do we decide that's the meaningful intimacy? Why is it less meaningful when I, like this weekend, go on a hike with a group of friends and they're like, how's your life? And I'm like, it's so good. I'm really, really enjoying this phase of my life. If I could imagine being a 90-year-old and wanting to time travel to any period of my life, it would be like 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. any night when I'm at home with August, my son. It's just paradise. It's cooking, it's talking, it's watching TV. That's my idea of heaven. Sharing that with my friends on the hike, that's deep intimacy too. Not just, oh, this is what I'm struggling with. This is what's hard right now. And there is this habit in culture that like, if we're sharing the hard stuff or complaining, then we're really bonding. Real intimacy is happening.
Well, when I went to school for psychology, if you were sharing the hard stuff or looking at the hard stuff, you were also considered like very valuable. You were doing the work.
Right. You're really.
And if I didn't have anything going on, it was like, okay, someone's not connected, you know.
It reminds me of the Seinfeld episode where George learned that he could keep getting promoted at work and everyone would think he was amazing if he would just do these deep, exasperated sighs all the time and like rub his forehead and like move papers around angrily. They would be like, well, that guy must be really, don't bother him. He's really crushing it. He must really work. Give that guy a promotion. Like we do this in life too. It's really funny. George Costanza, spiritual teacher.
Well, I love it. He's had a few lessons. We've quoted him on the show before, so he, in fact, keeps delivering. Okay, here's what I wanted to get at with that is the energetics. So again, I'm a Chinese medicine practitioner by background. I was doing energy medicine called acupuncture. That's what it is. And yet, it's still been a shift for me to experience the world of energy as real as the material concrete world, right? Like the quantum physics to be as real as the Newtonian physics. And I can like it conceptually, but I mean really to get like, this is real. And so if you speak with your friends and you're bonding about something painful, that's wonderful and everything. Sometimes that's a beautiful movement, but there's an energy dynamic that can happen, especially if it's done repetitively. If you're sharing a beautiful story, there's an energy dynamic that can happen. And I think we're at the phase, I know you and I are, Brooke, maybe the culture is beginning, the consciousness culture anyway, to start to recognize the importance of energy, like the real deep importance of these different kinds of energetic dynamics. This time recently, I just shared this thing on Facebook where it was like they had an experiment with kids in a school where they had two plants and one of the plants was bullied. You know, they were feeding it. I think it was like a recorder with like, I know, I was
so sad.
I'm like, a plant was harmed in the development of this study. And it was like fed with bullying and the other one was fed, you know, I love you, you're beautiful, positive affirmations. And you watched one of the plants wither. Like at base, we're not material beings, we're energetic beings. And all of us on the awakening path are awakening to that, not energy per se, but that we are made of consciousness. I don't know, how could I put language on it? But we're not this concrete reality we think we are. Like that was one of the messages I got the other day. I forget what I was tuning into for myself, but I was going within to do a little inquiry with my guides on health issues. And they were saying something along the lines of like, one of the things you're running into is you keep thinking your body is concrete. And as long as you do, and by that I mean tangible, material, right? As long as you do, it can't be changed the way. It can't be changed in a quantum way. It can't be changed rapidly and like completely, because there's an idea of time once I think of concrete, and then how long things take and all of these other things happen. So I think maybe for you and I, as we've been awakening, we're starting to awaken to, okay, we've done a lot of clearing at the emotional level. We sure have, right? We've done a lot of clearing at the somatic level, meeting tensions, releasing them, turning towards ourselves. But there's this other component of becoming masters at understanding energy and attention and perspective that I think you and I are recognizing like, oh, this is the next level of evolution.
Yeah. And when you were talking initially and you said that there's still that recoil to the word positive, right? Focus on the positive. It makes me recoil. So it's like, blah. Yeah, I know. Because I know what those communities look like. And I know the outcomes too. Usually people feel more shame about their humanity on the other side, which is why it gives me such a visceral response. And yet, what I didn't realize was I was going through this process of basically deconditioning the self, deconditioning my thoughts, emotions, body. And, I'm still engaged in that process, but there was enough of a softening agent over time that at a certain point, there is something else. And it turns out the something else is this creator nature, which David Thomas had pointed to very clearly. Many of the teachers we've spoken to have, but he just really honed in on that in our conversation with him. And then it starts to become fun because you can play. And actually, we're both obsessed with this book right now, Waking Up in 5D, Maureen St. Germain. I'll put it in the show notes. I did it. I remembered. And there was a passage in there very briefly where she said she had gotten information about that there was such a thing as like living karma free. And that she was like, what does that even mean? And she had to kind of sit with it. And whatever, like that's a whole other conversation if we want to break down, what does that even mean? What is karma? I don't want to go there. But the point being, let's say, just as something to get curious about, that it's possible for there to be enough healing to have happened that there is the land of healed, right? We're still alive. We're still responding to our lives in the full spectrum of human emotions. And we pointed at this some in our last episode, our 100th episode. But the creator aspect is what is able to come online. Because if I had tried to force that in myself when I was still, let's say, really dense, physically dense, as in gripping and hard tissue-wise, and mentally dense and really still believing all of my conditioning and my belief systems, the only way I could change my language would be to force myself to do something that I didn't have any experiential access to. So of course it would create more density in myself, more shame-based thoughts. Why can't I? Why can't I just think positively? Why can't I just be, nobody likes me. I'm such a downer, blah, blah, blah. But now that that's softened so much, I can be a lot more playful. And I'm discovering that language is one of the main places where that can happen. And so I'm watching habits like you were talking about, sometimes with a friend sharing something challenging or something painful is, of course, very intimate and very genuine, but that we can create a pattern. I think most of us can think about certain friendships where maybe they got wired together that way, where you're the people who complain together. And recently there's a friend who I haven't seen in a couple of years, because she and I came together at a time a bunch of years ago where we would like come together and complain. And, then at a certain point, I just kind of needed to release that friendship, not in a dramatic breakup way, but we just didn't spend time together. Now we don't live in the same town anymore. We ran into each other at Trader Joe's. And it was fascinating to watch me because I saw her, I was thrilled to see her, love her. And it's like I started to boot up complaining language very quickly. And, we're moms, so oftentimes it can be very easy about the kids. Oh my God, the grocery store is so busy today. I know, it's so crazy. I can't believe Thanksgiving's next week. Oh my God, I'm running around all the time, blah, blah, blah. And so she and I start going back and forth about how crazy busy everything is. And I can catch myself and I started to soften the language. The truth of the matter is everything I just said before. Like, this is far and away one of the most pleasurable time periods of my life. And the conversation slowed down. We're not speaking like people who are it's so busy. Everything's so stressful. And there starts to be more intimacy in the way that we're talking about our kids. So instead of like, oh, he's doing blah, blah, blah activity and I'm taking him over to blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh God, it's so sweet to watch them become their own people. It's so sweet to watch them discover long-term friendships that they really care about. It's so sweet. So those are the kinds of moments where like I didn't have to force myself to be like, well, look on the bright side. The good news is we got healthy kids. Like I wasn't forcing us or shaming us about something. There was access to a different kind of relating, different kind of language.
Yeah, I had a friend who was I think she used to listen to Abraham Hicks a lot and, all of those so she would think about the energy of the words and everything, which I agree with. But if you said something that she thought wasn't in alignment with energy and words that was positive for you, she would be like the language police, like, don't say that.
Right. Which is all fear, okay, right?
Well, yeah, that already interjected its own energy dynamic. It's not the word, it's the energy, right?
Be careful, don't screw up your life. You're doing it wrong. I feel much better now. Thank you.
You have now manifested, right? So I'm like, oh, no, if we believe the energy is the root, because that's all that we're talking about is the power of consciousness to create something, then let's just slow down the word police thing. But it's funny, Mario and I were flying home from Florida Saturday. And it was a tough week. My dad was in the hospital. So him and my mom were doing their dynamics and he was in pain. And so there was just a lot of energy hanging off the walls. That's what I mean by a tough week for this person to deal with that level of energetic stimulation. It puts me in a challenge zone, but I did very well with the challenge. But, by the end of the week, I can feel myself fatiguing. That's usually what happens. It's like I start to fatigue. So we're on the plane and we're, a half hour delayed. And then we get onto the tarmac and then we're delayed again, another 45 minutes. You're just sitting in the plane, that whole thing. So Mario starts to get a little crabby. He's like, I'm starting to get real crabby. And I'm like, no. You know what? Yeah, it sucks. But the truth is we got TVs. We were just in Florida for a week. We're heading to our beautiful home. It's fine. It's really fine, right? So I was like, and I felt that was true. It wasn't a bypass. In any moment, there's a million things happening, right? So in that moment, there was one frustrating thing happening, but there was also good things happening. I'm sitting with my honey. I just got to spend a week with my parents. All of these good things are happening. And then we get to the airport and there was this whole other transportation issue at the airport. And now we're both starting to wear thin and we're complaining about how the airport didn't handle it right and the transportation. And finally I was like, I am so sick of complaining. The reality is we went on a beautiful vacation and we're getting home fine. I can't even complain about this anymore. And I was like, can we just stop complaining? And he was like, okay. I'm like, this feels better. I don't even know what the point is serving anymore. And that's when you see those habitual loops. Nothing, this is a mental masturbation at a certain point. It's not like I'm complaining to the transportation authority who can change something. I'm just complaining for 30 minutes about how wrong everybody is, And it was a relief. And I think that's the interesting thing is it's not a bypass. It's a shift of attention a little bit. Is there anything I can do here in this moment? Right? Is there some way to address the problem? Well, then I will speak to the correct person and file my grievance. But if not, what's the energy I'm left with? I'm just working myself up into a bad mood to feel what? I don't know, righteous, justified. I don't know, whatever the case may be. So I thought it was really interesting to see once you start to pay attention to this stuff, here we all are, we're I want to be happy. I want to be happy. I want to find heaven on earth. I want to be awake. I want to feel bliss. And then we're the ones stirring our own pots. And sometimes in innocence, but once you start to bring consciousness to it, you'll see how often you're doing it because there's some secondary agenda. Everyone in my family, my parents mostly were just, they were having a rough week. So they were taking turns being in kind of crabby moods. And I would do the best I can to be with them, give them some space and then bring a little levity and we would soothe through it. And then I found myself, I don't know, whatever day it was, maybe by Friday being now I want to be in a crabby mood. My turn.
Right.
And I'm like, my turn? What's good about being in a crabby mood?
Yeah.
What is it I think I'm getting out of it? And maybe that woman, Maureen St. Germain, when she was talking about language, she was talking about whining. And she said that whining is a form of self-validation or a seeking of self-validation. So I can be isn't this shitty that my parents don't feel well and I'm tired? And you could be it sure is, Vanessa. And I'm myself got validated.
Right.
So I don't know what it is, but for the first time, I'm starting to have like such a keen awareness of it. Like, look at the choice you're making. See, I think what you were saying earlier was important, Brooke. Like, there was a stage it wasn't a choice. There was so much density, so much patterning that the only thing I could do was turn to it, meet it, and bring love.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
best case scenario, bring love in my case.
Yeah. Right. Like, that was the goal.
On a good
that was
day.
The aspiration.
Yeah.
And now there's so much more openness and spaciousness that I can see, like, oh, I have a choice right now. I can cling to my turn to be in a bad mood, or I could just let that go.
Mm-hmm.
And it may take a little bit to let it go, but not that much, not what I would have thought it would have taken.
Right. It's not a heavy lift.
No.
To see it a different way. And this is where language being a tangible thing, because it's like, we're checking our math, right? We can hear what comes out of our mouths. It becomes made into form. You know, me ruminating about something I might miss, right? Like, I might go off and start thinking about something else and miss that I spent 30 minutes thinking about how I suffer more than anyone else on the planet. You know, that easily could happen. But as soon as I start putting language to things, if I can tune my awareness to hear the kinds of things that are coming out of my mouth, or sometimes the thought patterns you have, but coming out of your mouth is handy because it is, and it's usually with another, right? So there's a relational aspect too. It gives me information. And so just to go over a few tangible things to play with for people listening who want to play with these as inquiries, some of the shifts, I had mentioned wonder. So, and this also comes from the book from Maureen St. Germain. She had talked about an example of like, why did I lose my keys? Or like, why is this happening? Why, blah, blah, blah. Why is go look for the problem, go look and find the problem. Whereas I wonder, I lost my keys. I wonder what's going on. Or like, that's interesting. I wonder what's up. It just has a much more like open-handed approach of curiosity as opposed to like heat-seeking missile, find the problem. And what are some other ones that I've been using with myself? Oh, I'll notice that a lot of times I'll say internally or externally, I have to, and it has this very laborious quality. Oh, I have to email my clients about tomorrow's appointment reminders. It's like, a very simple change. I'm not saying I don't have that task, and I'm not bright-siding and saying, I love that I have an abundant practice. Like, I could just simply say, I'm going to email my clients and remind them about tomorrow's appointments. It's just a middle place way of saying the same thing. If it's true, I will say, I want to, or I look forward to, only if it's true. Or I choose to. The most neutral is just, I'm going to email my clients about tomorrow. But I can, should or have to about like, something like an errand, I have to go grocery shopping. I should go grocery shopping. And when it comes out of my mouth, is that true? Or is there I want to? The truth of the matter is I want to. I actually look forward to. I love going and buying food and planning out food for the week. I'm going to. I want to. I look forward to. And it changes my experience of the way that I'm moving through my whole life. These aren't just phrases. It's then how the approach is and the continuity of the experience throughout. What is my experience then of going grocery shopping or of emailing clients or of vacuuming? Right.
Because as soon as we say I have to, the message we're giving back to this body mind is I am a servant of, I am obligated, I am under the burden of.
Yeah.
But if we say I want to, I choose to, I'm lucky enough to, I'm invited to, if we switch that, then again, the message we're giving back ourselves is I'm an active creator. I'm an active participant. I have choice. And so it's just a whole different internal experience.
Yeah. I come from a family culture, again, quite sure I'm not alone here, where it's you're here to function. Like your primary objective is function your way through life. So that's very common culturally. I have to, right? I have to go to work. I have to clean the house. I have to. It's like lug yourself through your life. And that's the best that you get as a human being. And this is all totally unconscious patterning in themselves and in me. And so as soon as I'm no longer just the object that needs to drag itself through tasks of functionality, suddenly I'm having a life that I can delight in and enjoy in its most ordinary moments and in its most exquisite moments. All of the above get to actually be experienced as the experiencer instead of the one getting it over with, getting the tasks of functionality checked off on the to-do list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Remember when we did the episode on codependence, we were talking about working with people like in a helping capacity. And that if you were suffering under the delusional belief system that you were obligated to do something, that you were responsible to do something, then when you help people, there's always this certain level of energetic drag to it. Mm-hmm. Like, I have to help people, right? And yet once you realize that you're not under obligation, that you are free, that you get to exist just because your existence is magnificent and life wants you to exist, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I choose to help people. I want to help people. And then that energy is extremely different. There's no drag on that. If anything, you get energy at your back. Well, the language is part of what defines the experience, or at the very least, the language can reflect to all of us which experience we're in. So that if I say to someone, oh, I have to see my clients, I can get curious. Like, do I feel obligated? Do I feel exhausted? Am I just using language habitually? Like what's happening underneath this? What's arising? And we can get a little closer to maybe some of the patterning that wants to be released around it, because it's such a clear difference of experience. I mean, what's funny is Maureen was saying, oh, when in 5D, the language have to doesn't fit 5D anymore. And I'm like, oh, good. Well, maybe that's why I've been telling people whenever they say you have to do something, I'm like, I don't have to do anything. I've always said that. I don't have to do anything. I may tell myself I have to.
Right. But you don't tell me I have to.
Yeah. The same thing as she's like, don't, aim not to use like judging or blaming language. And I noticed when someone would say, oh, how do you like that? If I don't like it, my saying was always, that's not my favorite.
That's right.
And
that's
Mario always used to laugh at me. I don't love that. That's not my favorite. And that's just natural. But she was saying, try to shift away from, well, that sucks, or that's bad, or this is, because that's just the language of dualism. So I think the whole thing is interesting, but how do you not make yourself crazy over it? This is, I think, where you and I can run into objection with a lot of the techniques and tools, because the fact is, as your consciousness wakes up, you naturally do these things. Right. And the techniques and tools before your consciousness wakes up almost always get used by the ego agenda, pulled through the same patterning that you've always run, and get used as a way to judge yourself, blame yourself, judge others, blame others, and collapse into the same emotions you've always collapsed into. So if you're not already curious about this, is there any usefulness in trying to become curious about your language? Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I do. I think that it's very useful with any practice that we have, meditation, spiritual inquiry, any class we're taking, anything at all, retreat, to pause and ask ourselves at different times as we go through those practices, am I using this against myself? And, Matt Kahn, who's become a dear friend, he's really good at pointing out these tools. There's so many things that can be very useful, but the ego will always find a way to use it against itself. So knowing that we all have very handy ego structures that are not the enemy, it can be helpful to just pause and ask, am I using this against myself? So if we play with this language tool, for example, the way we know we're using it against ourselves is if we feel more shame, more contracted, more anxious. We're berating ourselves more. We're more irritated with ourselves that we're not a certain way. That's proof that we're using it against ourselves. And so if we discover that we are in fact using it against ourselves, first of all, compassion, how human of you. We all have used very potent spiritual insight against ourselves because we have ego structures. So first of all, not a problem. And then the other thing to do is then instead of sort of shoving this down your own throat, you can focus on practices that are more like softening agents. Whatever works for you. So is there a certain kind of somatic meditation that really gets in there? Have you been doing realization process? Is it Locke Kelly's type of awareness inquiries? It doesn't matter what the thing is, as long as it feels like softening agent, useful, nourishing food, and stick with that. And just know that these things all have their own right timing. I mean, I've used this example before, but I remember 20 years ago, I was at the Tufts Craniofacial Pain Clinic because of my issues that I grew up with. And I couldn't open my mouth and I was just a ball of tension. And they pointed out to me that I was breathing using only emergency respiration. So every time I took a breath, I just used my little scalenes and kind of pulled my shoulders up towards my ears. And my ribs and my diaphragm weren't moving at all. So they very helpfully tried to teach me how to breathe using my diaphragm and my lungs. Of course, they were functioning, but I was just eking out little bits of breath. And then I spent, a month using that against myself, where if I would catch myself doing emergency breath, which I did 99% of the time, I would hold my breath until I could force myself to breathe in my belly or my rib cage. Like, that's being harmful towards the self. It's a very useful teaching to know how to breathe in a full, unimpeded way. But it was too much, too fast. And my conditioning was aggressive, right? So I was using it in an aggressive way. Nowadays, my breath feels really luscious. One of my favorite things in the whole wide world to do is to sit down or lay down to meditate and just feel how luscious breath moving through, breath breathing me feels. So fun. Same person, just a maturation and a softening process. So we don't have to force ourselves to be somewhere we're not. We're always just looking for what feels useful, functional.
Yeah, I know there's no clear roadmap and there are no clear steps, and I hate to even put it into language that might imply that, but it does seem that quite a bit of tenderness had to be cultivated or opened within myself to be able to just naturally be like, oh my God, that's so curious. I just said had to, or I just, right, spoke about what a victim I am of my circumstances for an hour again, thereby making, whatever people feel bad about, bad for me, or, whatever the pattern is. Like, I think it's almost like it does have its own natural evolution. And I think it is good what you said, like to check in with the markers. Like, if this is making you feel more afraid or more ashamed, this may not be the right tool for you at this moment. Or there's something else that could use some support that you can check in on, But in a way, it's like maybe that's why you and I both like John Prendergast's work so much. It's like, well, just come into the heart.
Right.
Because the thing is, once you can access your heart and really get into your heart, you just can't be mean to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So then you can play with these things. I mean, I think that's what you and I are trying to say at this point. This is play. Like, oh, this is so interesting. Am I a creator? How much is under my own creative capacity? How much can I influence my perspective and experience of reality? Can I shift the way I feel? What happens if I play with language? What about the stories I tell? Like I observe Matt Kahn. Whenever we ask Matt, how are you? Like we're friends. Hey, how's it going? Great. Amazing. Right. And I think it is going great and amazing. Yeah. But I think like every single human being, if he wanted to, he could complain. Mm-hmm. Right. There's always something to complain about. Always. So it's like, oh, well, that's really interesting. He's a really lovely, genuine, real person to be around. So I'll play with that. What if every time someone asked me, I knew one guy, I loved him. He was a carpenter. Every time I said, how are you? He said, better every day.
That's great.
No, I don't think he had great days every day. I know that guy. But, at this point, it's a certain amount of play. But if you're starting to notice that there's fear or shame or tension, then perhaps something else. And always tenderness is a good place to start. Yeah. I mean, always can I access my heart? Can I turn towards me tenderly? Because I think that does so much of the, oh gosh, it's like it gets the momentum running. And then it's so much easier for other momentum to take place that's genuinely positive, genuinely caring, genuinely curious. It's like the grease for the wheel.
Mm-hmm. It's like Neelam saying tenderness and transcendence are one and the same. That moment was so powerful for me because if we can cultivate tenderness, it is the game changer. It is the softening agent. And your mind, your ego structure will very naturally and very happily tell you, why can't you be more tender? You weren't tender just then with yourself. And then we can be tender even to that voice. And it's just like anything. It's just a learned skill. What does it feel like? Genuine tenderness. What does it feel like? Not, am I getting it right? Or what's the script? And as we just touch into that more and more, it does start to become more second nature. And like you said, it starts to become the grease for the wheels. Things start to move down a different track, actually. And then it starts to become playtime. Something completely new starts to happen.
Well, if you're tender and you're loving, you're not in the ego structure. Like really genuinely tender and loving, you're in transcendence. So Neelam says transcendence. Matt Kahn says the soul. Locke Kelly says awake awareness, right? But everybody says the soul has different qualities. So if you can just find love, great, you're not in the ego structure and then you don't have the dilemma. So the other thing I used to sometimes kind of like bristle about, not as much as the positivity thing, but kind of like, I don't know, I just couldn't accept it fully, was it's love or fear. When people would like say it's love or fear, you're either in love or you're in fear. And I'd be like, I don't know, that feels so too divided or something. Because there's plenty of times I didn't feel in love, but I didn't conceptualize of myself in fear. But I'm starting to understand, Matt Kahn would say the same thing. He's like, just be done. Just choose the light already. Like there's a certain point where he said, I think maybe it was in Portland this last time in September. He's like, you just have to finally choose because you can't straddle both. You can't be in your ego and your soul at the same time. It doesn't mean your ego is not existing. You just can't live in both in the same moment. I'm sure I'm putting words on this terribly, but you know what I mean, Brooke. Mm-hmm. It's like you just can't occupy fear and love in that way at the same exact moment. So he's like, just finally choose to be the light. Do it. Just do it. Just choose. Do it. Right. And he's saying it over a whole weekend in a much sweeter, more well-rounded way. But he did at one point say, you just have to choose. Like you can choose and you don't have to heal forever. Yeah. I mean, this is what's interesting for us to be coming up against is, especially for people who've listened to us forever, like we talk about healing. And then you get the idea, like, I'm going to have to heal forever. But that's not exactly true.
No.
It's just you have to heal until enough density's gone. And then you realize like, oh, I don't have to heal forever. I don't even know what I was healing. Like I forgot all about it. I feel different now and I'm in love and everything feels like you're experiencing it from a different dimension of reality. So I don't know. I'm starting to get like just curious about all those resistances and like, could it be as simple? And I know it's not simple, but could it be as simple as just choosing? love, and that if there's fear present, there's not love, and fear can't be true. So now sit and find a place of love and then move again.
Find whatever is a little waft of tenderness that you can move towards. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't have the answers, but I think it's really wonderful to introduce this idea that there is, so last thing, I know we're wrapping up, but at my magical Thanksgiving, I had a conversation with my dear friend Emily, and sorry, Emily, but I'm totally going to steal this from you. We were talking about how healing doesn't have, she and I have both been on a pretty mega healing, totally, separate from one another in our own lives for the last 6 years or so. So we were catching up because we only see each other once a year at this. And she and I, but we didn't know this is what we just connected across the room. It was like, there's such a thing as done with healing. And she was saying, God, I spent all these years feeling like I just need to learn how to navigate being adrift in this rowboat on the ocean. And I feel pretty seasick all the time, but I guess I just get good at riding the waves. This is my life now thing. This is my life now. Mm-hmm. I just ride the waves. She's like, and then all of a sudden the rowboat washes ashore and you're like, oh, land. Land. There's a whole other experience here. And then you go explore the land. Right? It's not like then you sit in your rowboat and you're like, this feels different. Then you get to have a whole different experience of life. You get out of the rowboat. You stand on dry land. You explore the dry land. You live your life on land. It's just a different experience than, I guess I have to learn how to ride these waves forever. So there is land. And, we've been doing this show for a couple years. I'm so glad, because I'm somebody who's identified very closely with my healing journey and with my suffering. God bless me. That was very much a part of my identity structure. I'm so glad we get to bring this to the fore. There is actually a totally different experience of reality that's possible. And there's nothing wrong with you if you're not there yet. But we do want to say, it's possible. This isn't the forever game of being tossed about in the waves. There's something else. There's land.
I know one of our listeners, I posted something about codependence and they were like, more work. It never stops.
I know, I saw that and I was like, oh, it doesn't.
I know, I'm like, come here.
More opportunities for total freedom is more like what we're pointing at.
We need a group hug.
Not like, here's your new assignment. Get to work.
That happens a lot of times if we're overloaded, that's usually for me,
this is an overloaded time. Yeah. When it's like,
the symbol, the nervous system is like, not one more thing. I'm at complete overstimulation. So, if that's where you are, that'll happen too.
Yeah. And tenderness for that.
On all your language. Just
mercy
find some
for
tenderness.
That. Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed today's show. The show notes, including resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. Our member platform is at patreon.com/blissandgrit. You can head on over to this platform and donate to the show and also get great rewards for your support. If you're wanting to engage with these topics in a deeper way, it's a wonderful place to go for a more immersive experience. We'd also love it if you came and played with us on Instagram and Facebook, or subscribe on the website, which is blisandgrit.com, to get our weekly digest of all the resources we're currently loving. I don't even think I can express to you how grateful we are for the reviews that so many of you have written, for all of the comments we get, the letters we get, and most importantly, for the membership support that many of you are providing on Patreon. We couldn't do it without you. This is a listener-supported show. So thank you all so much. We appreciate you. Till next time.